Dear friends, this is episode number 52 of the Limitation Act. In episode number 51, I have read section 21 of the Limitation Act and I have to some extent explained. Now, today in this episode, we will consider some of the decisions of the Supreme Court and various High Courts, and consider the section also along with that. So section 21(1), where after the institution of a suit a new plaintiff or defendant is substituted or added, the suit shall, as regards him, be deemed to have been instituted when he was so made a party. So a person is added either as plaintiff or as defendant subsequent to the institution of the suit. He shall be deemed to have been, the suit as against him shall be deemed to have been instituted on the date on which he is made a party. Suppose a suit is filed and a person is impleaded after 1 year, made a party either as plaintiff or as a defendant. By that time the period of limitation is over. It shall be taken that the suit as against him has been filed on the date on which he is impleaded, except when the proviso applies, provided that where the court is satisfied that the omission to include a new plaintiff or defendant was due to a mistake made in good faith, it may direct that the suit as regards such plaintiff or defendant shall be deemed to have been instituted on any earlier date. So that if a person is instituted after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, depending upon the longevity of the suit, the normal rule is that the suit as against him shall be deemed to have been instituted on that date. Suppose the period of limitation is 12 years, the suit is filed after the expiry of 2 years, balance 10 years is there. Even if a new party is added after 2 years, still it is well within time. On the other hand, if the limitation is 3 years and the suit is filed just 1 month before the expiry of the period of limitation of 3 years, and after 1 year a new plaintiff or new defendant is added or substituted, then the suit shall be regarded as against him shall be regarded as having been filed on the date on which he is impleaded, except when the proviso applies. When the proviso will apply, two conditions must be satisfied: that the omission to include a new plaintiff or defendant was due to a mistake made in good faith. So one, it must be a mistake, and that mistake might have been committed due to, on account of in good faith. Mistake might have been committed in good faith. So good faith is to be proved, and it must also be shown that it was a mistake. Mistake may be, reasons may be varied depending upon the facts and circumstances of the case. The court will consider whether the ingredients of the proviso to section 21 have been satisfied or not. Then subsection 2, nothing in subsection 1 shall apply to a case where a party is added or substituted owing to assignment or devolution of any interest during the pendency of a suit, or where a plaintiff is made a defendant or a defendant is made a plaintiff. That is, I said that last portion of it, a plaintiff is made a defendant or defendant is made a plaintiff, it is otherwise called transposition. The other is devolution, assignment or devolution. Order 22 CPC provides for devolution and impleadment. Order 22 Yes, Rule 10. Procedure in the case of assignment before final order in the suit. In other cases of an assignment, creation of devolution of an interest during the pendency of the suit may, by leave of the court, be continued by or against the person to or upon whom such interest has come or devolved. That is a provision. Rule 10 of Order 22. Now, transposition is, so far as transposition is concerned, there are two provisions in the CPC that also you have to note. Order 23, Rule 1A. Order 23 we have dealt with in the episodes relating to CPC. There, Order 23 is withdrawal or adjustments of suit. Withdrawal can be of two types: without the permission, with the permission. Abandonment is there, withdrawal is there. Now, so far as withdrawal is concerned, a transposition is concerned, it is contained in Rule 1A of Order 23. Where a suit is withdrawn or abandoned by a plaintiff under Rule 1, and a defendant applies to be transposed as a plaintiff under Rule 10 of Order 1. Rule 10 of Order 1. The court shall, in considering such application, have due regard to the question whether the applicant has a substantial question to be decided as against any other defendants. I gave an example in a suit for partition. The plaintiff was prosecuting the suit, but later he did not show that much interest as he had at the inception, and there was a doubt whether he was colluding with some of the defendants. And any other defendant may apply to the court to transpose him as a defendant and to transpose one of the defendants as the plaintiff, or he can be made as an additional plaintiff. That also is possible. Transposition takes place under Rule 1A when there is an abandonment or withdrawal. Even without abandonment or withdrawal, the court may permit, there the provisions of Section 151 may apply, and Order 1 Rule 10. Order 1 Rule 10 is, say, a power is very wide. Order 1 Rule 10 also we may consider along with this, so that it will be complete. See, it's a long section. Never mind, we will have it. Where a suit has been instituted in the name of a wrong person as the plaintiff, or where it is doubtful whether it has been instituted in the name of a right plaintiff, the court may, at any stage of the suit, if satisfied that the suit has been instituted through a bona fide mistake, here also bona fide mistake, and that it is necessary for the determination of the real matter in dispute, so to do, order any other person to be substituted or added as plaintiff upon such terms as the court thinks just. So what are the ingredients here? The suit has been instituted in the name of a wrong plaintiff, or whether it is doubtful whether the right plaintiff has been impleaded. The right person has been shown as the plaintiff. The court may, at any stage of the suit, there is no difficulty. The court has wide powers. At any stage of the suit it can be, provided what is to be proved is the real matter in dispute in controversy must be able to be decided by such process. This impleadment is necessary, or substitution is necessary, so as to it is necessary for the determination of the real matter in dispute, plus, and that process, if satisfied that the suit has been instituted through a bona fide mistake. So court must be satisfied that there was a bona fide mistake in the matter of making the wrong person as the plaintiff, or not impleading the right person as the plaintiff. It must be a bona fide mistake. Then the court must be satisfied that to have a complete and real, adjudication of the dispute, and for the determination of the real matter in dispute, it is necessary to have that substitution or impleading. Then the court may do it. 2. Court may strike out or add parties. The court may, at any stage of the proceedings, either upon or without the application of either party. See, suo motu power is also there under subsection 2, subrule 2. The court may at any stage of the proceedings, either upon or without the application of either party, and on such terms as may appear to the court to be just, order that the name of any party improperly joined, whether as plaintiff or defendant, be struck out, and that the name of any person who ought to have been joined, whether as plaintiff or defendant, or whose presence before the court may be necessary in order to enable the court effectually and completely to adjudicate upon and settle all the questions involved in the suit, be added. Subrule 1 relates to the plaintiff, subrule 2 plaintiff as well as defendant. Subrule 2 suo motu power is also there. Then what is the aim? And whose presence is necessary in order to enable the court to effectually and completely to adjudicate upon and settle all the questions involved in the suit. That is a different. Subrule 1, it is for determination of the real matter in dispute. Here it is necessary to enable the court to effectually and completely to adjudicate upon and settle all the questions involved in the suit. So these are all, this is a scheme by which the court has got wide powers to make or substitute, add, strike out any party at any stage, and in some cases with the application and some cases even without the application. Suo motu. Then what happens in such a case? We have seen that in Rule 1A of Order 23, reference is made to Rule 10 of Order 1. Now what happens if the process under subrule 1 or subrule 2 of Rule 10 takes place? Then subrule 5. See subrule 5 of Rule 10 of Order 1. Subject to the provisions of the Indian Limitation Act 1877. Now therefore we have to read it as 1963. Section 22. Now it is section 21. The proceedings as against any person added as defendant shall be deemed to have begun only on the service of summons, subject to the provisions of the Indian Limitation Act. So section 21 is a provision which provides for otherwise, for condoning the lapse and taking that it is instituted in the name of that person on an anterior date. The proceedings as against any person added as defendant shall be deemed to have begun only on the service of summons. So a person who was not a party to the suit has been added. It is not on the date on which he is added, the date on which he has received the summons is the cutoff date so far as computing the period of limitation as against him. So this is to be read along with the other provision, Order 23. This is to be read along with section 21 also. This is the connection between these provisions. So when we study section 21, we must be aware of Order 23 Rule 1A, and we must be aware of the scope of Rule 10 of Order 1 also. Then only it will be a complete study. Therefore, dear friends, please take care to consider these things also. Otherwise, sometimes some mistake may happen. So that these are all, this is the beauty or this is the difficulty, whichever it is, of the civil litigation. There the skill of a lawyer matters much. It is not just a book where you can search and find out all these things on just mere looking at it. Therefore, that is why in civil litigation the service of the lawyers is necessary in most of the cases. And that is the necessity of maintaining a good bar, a learned, dutiful bar, for which we have to equip ourselves and we have to provide the best service to the litigants, for which we have to study thoroughly. Even when you are a law student, you must be able to understand all these things. Unfortunately, at the time when we were students, see, we were not taught in these lines. See, we were taught the provisions, we were given practical training also, we had that opportunity, but that was not enough. These are all things which you have to learn in the actual practice. So what we study in the law college is quite different from the actual practice. So what my endeavor is to instill confidence in the law students, even to understand all these things, so that when they start practice, they are aware of these things, so that they will be welcome in any office. So that it is not only study for the examination. If you are going to practice, concentrate on these things, on actual practice as well at this stage itself. This is the right time for young law students to learn. It's the correct age. After a particular age, you may not be able to remember many things. For example, a person, a 15 years, 20 years boy can learn by heart 2 pages, 3 pages, which a person who has crossed 60 years may not be able to learn by heart. That is because of the age. So this is the right time, dear young lawyers and dear young law students, that this is the right time where you may spend time to master these laws and to have the necessary tools before you enter into the profession. So say I have spent 2 minutes on that. I am sorry. Yes, now we will come back to section 21. So we have seen the provisions. We have also seen the various ingredients necessary to satisfy these various provisions. Now we go to some of the decisions. So if you read these decisions, your scope of understanding will be quite widened. Read not only the paragraphs which I read, but the other paragraphs also. So whenever you are not confined to head notes alone, it will be misleading. Head note is by the author of the book, law journal. It may be sometimes mistaken, misleading. And you cannot cite before a court the head note. You cannot read the head note and argue. You have to read that particular paragraph. And take care that whenever you mention about a decision by year and page number, then you also mention the name of the case. These are all the tips that I can give. And now we go to the decisions. 1983 2 SCC 8. Parallel citation AER 1983 Supreme Court 271. Munshi Ram versus Narsi Ram, NARSI, Narsi Ram and another. This decision has been followed in almost all the decisions which came subsequently. So this is a well accepted proposition by the Supreme Court and various high courts. So take care to see what it is. Now the suit is for preemption. There the appellant filed a suit for possession of a piece of land in the exercise of his right of preemption against two persons, alleging that they had purchased the land from his father under a registered sale deed in total disregard of his rights of preemption. Preemption suit has to be filed immediately. Several things, preemption that cannot be prolonged. I think the period of limitation is 1 year or so. I am not quite sure. Please check up. Now, considering this, the assignment deed, the transfer deed contained the names of these two persons. And these two persons were made the defendants. At a later stage, this document was read out, which contained three names. They have vaguely contended in the written statement, the defendants, two in number. They contended in the written statement that all the assignees have not been made parties. They did not say, we are the assignees, there is one more person. please implead him also, otherwise all the matters in controversy cannot be adjudicated effectively and completely. Therefore implead him. Then there is a failure, we can understand. Here the document which is produced does not contain. Then a registration copy was obtained by the plaintiff. The registration copy was a fake copy, not a genuine copy. There 2 names of the assignees were there instead of 3. How that such a copy was issued, we do not know. Anyhow, the registration copy got from the registrar's office and which was produced by the plaintiff before court contained the names of 2 assignees, 2 transferees, and they were made defendants. Later at the fag end of the trial, it came out and said that the suit is not maintainable. Defendants say that the suit is not maintainable without the junction of the 3rd person who is an assignee. Then immediately an application was filed to implead him also. Then by that time the suit was barred by limitation. Then the proviso to section 21 was invoked. It is in that context, in Munshi Ram's case, this dictum was laid down. You may see paragraph 8, 9, paragraph 8 and 9, long paragraphs. I shall read a few lines. We shall now have to consider, I am sorry, I will take 5 minutes to read it. It is worth reading. We shall now have to consider whether the appellant is entitled to claim the benefit of the proviso to section 21(1) of the Act, and if he is entitled to it, what is the date on which the suit against that party proposed to be newly added should be deemed to have been instituted. 1. If he should be impleaded. If he is to be impleaded at this stage, what is the date with reference to which the suit shall be treated as having been filed? That is, these are the 2 questions. It is not disputed that the appellant had obtained a certified copy of the sale deed in question from the office of the sub-registrar before the suit was filed, and in that copy only respondents 1 and 2 had been shown as the vendees. Munni Devi was not shown in that copy as a vendee. The suit which was filed on such and such date was well within the period of limitation prescribed under Article 97 of the Act as against respondents 1 and 2. There is no evidence to show that on the date on which the appellant knew by any other means that there was any other vendee who had purchased the land along with respondents 1 and 2. In the written statement which was cleverly drafted, the name of Munni Devi was not mentioned. It merely stated that all the vendees had not been impleaded as defendants. The original sale deed which was with the respondents 1 and 2 was not produced in court. Along with the written statement. It should have been produced. The appellant who had looked into the certified copy of the sale deed asserted that the plea that the suit should be dismissed for non-joinder of necessary parties was untenable. A plea of non-joinder of necessary parties was raised, and if it is found by the court that there was a non-joinder of a necessary party, the suit may entail in dismissal. So that was the point which was argued. Then it was answered by the plaintiff saying, no, see, I have made these 2 persons as the defendants. Look at this certified copy of the document, there only 2 persons are the vendees. I have impleaded them. No other name is mentioned in the written statement. Then at that time what happened? Stated that the plea should be dismissed for non-joinder of necessary party was untenable, as all the persons who were shown as vendees in the certified copy had been impleaded. He had no reason to suspect that there was an error in the certified copy until the original sale deed was read out in the trial court by the counsel for respondents 1 and 2 on such and such date. It cannot be presumed that the appellant must have known that Munni Devi was also a vendee because the vendor was his father. His father, plaintiff's father, was the vendor. That does not mean that he passed away. Does not mean that the son knew that Munni Devi is also an assignee. How does he know? In fact, the appellant had nothing to gain by not impleading Munni Devi, as also the defendant, when he filed the suit, and there could be no motive for doing so. It must therefore be held that the omission to implead her as a defendant was due to a mistake. If such mistake is made in good faith, the proviso to section 21(1) of the Act would be attracted. The meaning of the expression good faith is explained in 2H of the Act thus: good faith, nothing shall be deemed to be done in good faith which is not done with due care and attention. So, what is the due care and attention that can be taken by the plaintiff here? He has seen the document. There are only two persons are shown as vendees. He pleaded them as defendants. Then the defendant did not raise that there is a third man and so is the third man. Nor did they produce the original title deed to show that there are three persons including Munni Devi, and therefore Munni Devi having not been impleaded, the suit is barred. No such contention was raised. A very cleverly drafted written statement, and at the fag end of argument this was raised, and Munni Devi was impleaded. Then the question is whether she should be taken, it must be taken that she was impleaded on an anterior date. Then the discussion goes on in paragraph 9. I will read a small portion. The bar of limitation is thus got over by the appellant because Munni Devi is a necessary party. She has to be impleaded under sub rule 2 of rule 10 of order 1 of the Code of Civil Procedure to enable the court to effectually and completely to adjudicate upon and settle all the questions involved in the suit. See the connection between order 1 rule 10. The application filed by the appellant on June 15, 1978 is therefore allowed. The amendment of the plaint regarding the date of cause of action has thus become necessary. The judgments and decrees of the High Court, the First Appellate Court and the Trial Court therefore set aside, etc., condoning the delay and holding that this suit as against Munni Devi was instituted on an anterior date. Now we will go to the other decisions in the next episode. Thank you.